Thank you very much for joining us for Next Up. Alvin and I will be hosting for the next half hour or so. This is the program where we interview community leaders about current issues, and it's been estimated by the ACLU that there are between 27 and 30 bills in Jefferson City which would take away rights of the transgender community in the state of Missouri. In fact, on Monday, advocates of those bills are planning a demonstration in Jefferson City. So we thought we'd get the other side and say, okay, are transgender rights under attack? Are they threatened in the Show Me State? And with us right now is Maharat Rori Neiss, who's the mother of a transgender son. She's also an LGBTQ advocate. Ms. Neiss, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We're also joined by Elliot Laurence, who's a transgender man, who is a promo advocate. Promo is kind of like to the LGBT community what the ADL is to Jewish concerns. It's an advocacy organization trying to set the record straight in its way. Thank you very much for joining us on Next Up.
Thank you.
Well, I'll ask you first, Maharat Rori Neiss, do you think that transgender rights are under attack right now in the Show Me State?
I think they absolutely are under attack, and not only in Missouri, but across the country. We are seeing waves of these bills, but probably nowhere more so than in the state of Missouri right now.
For example, there is a proposal that would say that a minor would not be eligible in some cases for therapy or puberty blockers or hormone therapy. So one would have to wait to what, the age of 18 or 19 for that?
Yes, that's correct.
And currently someone who is 13, 14, 15 would be eligible in the state of Missouri?
Well, gender-affirming healthcare looks different for every person who receives it. So it's really hard for us to have any one conversation about what's really a wide range of medicine. But currently, people who look to access at younger ages, exactly what you said. When we're talking about gender-affirming healthcare for people who are minors, we're talking about initially supporting them through that transition. That could be through talk therapy, that could be through talking with their pediatrician about what that might look like as they get older. That could be any number of things. And then as kids get to be 12, 13, we might be talking about puberty blockers, which would delay somebody from developing in the body that they know is not theirs into a gender that they are not. And then later we would be talking about taking hormones to have puberty in the gender that that person is.
Did you want to follow up on that? Just following up on what Charlie said, obviously with all these bills, there's some, group of people in Missouri that want to change how our laws work. So do you feel like you're kind of under attack legally in this state?
Absolutely. I think that there's a lot of bills that are being set by people who may not quite understand what harm they could be doing. And if they do understand the harm, just seeing kind of that ignorant views of just maybe being confused about what transgender people are trying to do, and really that's just trying to live their life. And so it's definitely disheartening to see all of these bills coming forward.
Based on where they're coming from, do you think honestly that you could explain away the way they think right now? Because my question is kind of like, why? This is not an undue burden on the state. This is just, there's political reasons, there's all kinds of different reasons, things, but usually it comes down to this is a cost or a burden to the state. This is not. So why are legislators so involved in this?
I wish I could answer that, but as someone who is transgender and I have a transgender family and friends who I love, sometimes I even forget about how people can view transgender people, because I'm filled with so much love for my friends and for the people in my community. Sometimes it's shocking to see how these people can have these strange views.
Now, Elliot, what's your story?
Yeah, so I transitioned when I was 19 years old. I have 3 sisters, so I always knew something was a little different growing up, but because of not having the language growing up in St. Charles County at my schools and things, I wasn't really sure what was going on until I was a bit older in high school. I joined the U.S. Air Force Reserves at 17 years old, right before I graduated from high school. And so I was in the military when I I went to basic military training, and I met so many different people from so many different cultures that I may not have gotten growing up in St. Charles, and it clicked for me. So when I was 19, I took it upon to go to gender therapy to kind of talk to a professional who I think would help me a lot, and it did. And so me and my mom, we talked about it, and I started hormone replacement therapy before I went to Webster University.
Can I follow up on that? My guess is that the military was more accepting of what you wanted to do than the state of Missouri is.
Yes. So I talked to the chief master sergeant of my unit before I had the conversation with my mom, because I was so afraid of what could happen if I decided to transition. And this was in 2018 under the Trump administration. I wasn't sure what was going. I didn't know if I was going to get removed from my military contract, but the people in my unit were great, and I would get a few questions here or there from people who just didn't know, but other than that, I didn't get a lot of backlash or anything like that. Most of the issues that I found was through paperwork and through them not knowing how to go about with having the medical transition of a transgender person.
And your son is a transgender boy. At one point, you obviously, with your husband, had to go through what I would think would be a real difficult time, thinking, what is the best thing for us to do in our family? And how old is your son right now?
My son is 11 now.
11, yeah.
He transitioned when he was 7. And as a parent, you go through all the questions you could possibly imagine. And I just think, when I think about all of these people who are pushing back against these bills, they're challenging it, saying that we're forcing our children to do this, that this is some kind of mind manipulation or some way for me to get attention. And we've been accused of all kinds of horrific things, when the reality is more like what you said, Charlie, which was that when our son first said that he was a boy, we didn't know what that meant, and we had a lot of questions about that. And we felt really lucky that because he was young, that gave us time. We didn't start off jumping into any kind of medical transition. We had a lot of time to talk to therapists, to talk to other individuals, to talk to our pediatrician, to talk to trans adults. I remember texting one of my friends who's a trans man, and he said, kids who express confusion of gender as kids sometimes grow up to be trans, sometimes grow up to be cis, sometimes grow up to be gender non-binary. Basically, we knew no more than we did the day before about our 7-year-old. And so what we made the decision to do was to say, we are going to love and support our child. At 7, what that meant was letting him cut his hair, letting him buy the clothes that he wanted to buy, calling him the name that he asked to be called. That's what it is. And we asked a lot of questions. What would that mean for the future? I have 2 other children. I don't know what it means for their future either. One day my son tells me he's going to be in the Olympics. Do I know if that's true? He hasn't done any training or anything, but we still just say, that's great, we'll cheer you on. And so we've really tried to say that more than anything, if we told our son that we didn't believe who he was, that was what was going to do more damage than any of these other things that these bills are trying to stop.
Now, would any of these bills halt the medical care that your son is receiving right now?
So my son is early on in the process, but we are having a lot of conversations about what that would look like. And so yes, these bills would have a significant implication on the care that he would be able to receive in the state of Missouri.
Of all the bills, and I know there's so many of them, this is probably a difficult question, do you feel as though these are the most misguided?
Honestly, I feel like all the bills are misguided. I mean, there is an attempt to make people in this state think that trans people are something to be afraid of and something to be squashed down upon, right? That this is an idea that needs to be eradicated in the state of Missouri. And so you've raised up the healthcare bills. There's also bills to ban trans kids from playing sports on the teams that they want to play on. There are currently 5 trans athletes who have gone through the process that has been established by the Missouri State High School Athletics Association to play sports. So we're talking about a significant number of bills, time, effort, for what's going to impact 5 individuals in the state. There's also bills to ban drag performances. There's bills to ban teachers from talking about gender or sexuality in class. all of these are because there are people who just feel like their way of life is currently being threatened. And if they could stamp that down, then maybe they can go back to, I don't know, some version of this world that they believe in. But the reality is that none of these things have happened because anyone's forcing anyone to do it. No one's telling individuals that they're trans. People are. And so all we're doing in passing these bills is attacking and marginalizing a group of people that, quite honestly, is already an incredibly vulnerable population in our country.
How do you respond to the article that came out, I think, in early February, where an intake worker, a caseworker at the Washington University School of Medicine, or at BJC, wrote this kind of whistleblower account in her view, her name Jamie Reid, and she said that there's not much therapy that goes on for the kids before they transition, that they're sent to a therapist who's given a template to sign off on, and it's kind of pro forma, that it's not very intense or in depth, and that some of the kids, they're having buyer's remorse. They've undergone mastectomies and then they change their mind, or they have medical consequences that they didn't anticipate, like liver toxicity, or vaginal lacerations, or the list goes on and on. Is it possible that there are some kids who are not going through the system very well, and that this Jamie Reid is correct?
What I will say is that after Jamie Reid's report came out, absolutely no families have come forward in St. Louis to back up any of her allegations. So she tells stories about families, but none of those families have gone public with it. And instead, we've seen dozens and dozens of families who have received treatment through the gender clinic at Washington University counter every one of those claims. I will say that I knew Jamie Reid. I spoke with her when my son first expressed that he was a boy and I wanted to learn more about this. I called the gender clinic, I spoke with her, and we talked about getting lists of therapists. It was made very clear to me that in the future, should we decide to pursue medical transition, that none of this would happen without parental approval, a pediatrician's approval, an endocrinologist, and a certified therapist. And I was given a list of therapists, not who were going to be pro forma, but who had expertise in working with the LGBTQ community and who knew how to navigate through the red tape of paperwork. But when we started my son with a therapist, which we all wanted to make sure that he was talking that through with everyone, he was going to weekly appointments. There was nothing that was pro forma or sped through, and nobody who was pushing us in any direction in those conversations.
Now, if without that situation, you said, you know, no families came forward. People who, like I say, don't have a trans child, have you heard from them saying, like, what is going on in this state is unacceptable? I really don't know a lot about your situations, but I do know when something is right or wrong. Do you feel like there is, just a subject of the Missouri population to say, look, whatever it is, I just don't think what's going on is right. Are they reaching out to you all and getting involved with your advocacy?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have people who have expressed concern, especially as I've kind of put myself forward as someone who, if someone has questions, they can come talk to me. But not all transgender people want to be that person who has to explain to someone who they are, why they're doing this. They just want to live. So I definitely have had people who have asked me if, like, we're doing okay, just, because even if, like, some of the bills don't affect me as a trans adult, it's still so upsetting to see all these people who are actively trying to put down a community of people.
Before you transitioned, Elliot, what was your life like, your mental state, your mental health?
Yeah, so, I mean, I think that being transgender has never been, like, the worst thing of my life. It's never been awful for me. When I think that before I was able to get the hormone replacement therapy that I felt like I needed, I was very confused, and I did have some, like, depression of just being, like, just feeling off. And it's a feeling that, unfortunately, talking to a lot of cisgender people, it's hard to explain to them what this is feeling. But I remember that when I finally was seeing the effect of my HRT, I finally, for the first time, felt like it was, like, tilted in the right direction, if that makes sense. And it felt like I was finally home in my own body.
What age would you say that process began?
Yeah, so I started HRT at 19, and so as I kind of moved forward, and also just the moment that I understood and had the language for what was going on, that was a moment. And I think when I was maybe 18 or 17, that was when I was finally understanding the language for what I was feeling.
Because advocates for transgender rights often say that this is a mental health issue, where if certain individuals don't get gender-affirming care, they're at risk of suicide and other mental health problems that the rest of us may not know about.
I think it's important to remember that gender-affirming care is health care. I mean, it's hard to imagine us having this conversation about any other form of health care. And that's what I also hear from people who are shocked by this, who are not directly impacted. They're horrified at the thought that the legislature could say that if you consult with a team of medical professionals and they recommend a course of medical treatment, that the government could step in and say, no, you're not allowed to do that. These are medical treatments that have been reviewed by medical boards. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to quote all the processes that go through for something to become approved medical care. But I think we all know that that is not a lighthearted process. And so we wouldn't even be having this conversation about anything else. Any other form of medical care, if you were denied access to it, would obviously have huge implications on your mental health, depression, anxiety, for the fact that there is treatment that you have been told that you need, and then a government tell you that they are not comfortable with you receiving it.
Well, that seems kind of impossible in that, okay, so they're passed this law. Is this law legal? I mean, could this be challenged? What's the next step? Because they're doing all kind of things in Jefferson City that make no sense, okay, on a lot of different, parameters. But there are other bodies are saying, like, yeah, go ahead and do that, because we're going to sue, and I think we're going to win. Is that your next step if some of these things actually do become law?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not an attorney in that, and so I think that there are groups that are looking into what the next steps would be, but that's not the point that we want to get to, although I agree. They're going to pass something in Jefferson City. But the reality is that we don't have the time to wait while the lawyers sort all of that out. Real people are being hurt right now. And the very fact that some of the most powerful people in the state are even discussing this issue and deciding that this is a political maneuver that advances their political career is already harming people.
I was going to ask you that. I was going to, at some point, I was going to say, this is just more about getting votes and politics than you think it's actual concern or care. Either way.
I think there's a few people who think that they're genuinely really passionate about this, but I think that there is an overwhelming number of people across the country who recognize that if they could convince a group of people to be scared of something and then show them that they're fighting it, that they could earn political points for it. And they've decided that the transgender community is an easy community to pick on right now. And that's up to all of us to say, we won't stand for it.
I think I read in the New York Times and in a story about you and your family that your husband's been looking at real estate in Illinois. Was that a joke? Or?
It's not a joke, because he looks at real estate in Illinois constantly. Look, the reality is that we're not making any specific plans right now, but my #1 priority is to protect my child. That's part of what's so painful about these accusations. The idea that I would not do anything and everything in my power to protect my child. And if this state becomes unsafe for my child and my family, then we might be left with no choice but to look elsewhere.
Rory, they say the human brain isn't developed till age 26. Are you ever concerned that maybe some of the life-changing decisions made by a young person are a little too early? Because, sometimes a teenager, someone who's 10, 11, doesn't really know what's best for him or her. How do you respond to people who raise that question?
I say that's exactly why we want puberty blockers. Puberty blockers buy time. I definitely don't want to be thinking about a 12-year-old, my 13-year-old, making the decision of hormone replacement therapy without understanding the full impact of all that could be. I can't make that decision. It's going to impact his life, not mine. Puberty blockers means that we can delay puberty precisely so that he doesn't then need surgery later on, right? When we're talking about stopping puberty, we mean transgender girls not developing facial hair and having deeper voices, transgender boys not developing breasts. And so if those things happen and if our kids are not allowed to stop that puberty, then those children do need this surgery that is more life endangering. So I find it really interesting that the people who have exactly those concerns are also trying to stop puberty blockers, which exactly give us that opportunity to allow our kids to make those decisions when they're older.
And you brought up that, age. The school system or education, has it been interrupted for your son? Has it continued on as it would have? Just how has the school reacted to the decisions that are, being made?
The school's been really supportive, and I want to say that really everybody in our life has been supportive other than the Missouri State Legislature. I've said repeatedly when I've testified, they're the only people who have ever told my son that he is not loved, embraced, normal. No one else in his life has said that. His school has not only been great about giving him excused absences as he's traveled to Jefferson City repeatedly to testify against these bills, but the administration of his school has actually committed that every time one of these bills comes up, somebody from the administration would be there to testify as well. And so they've been sending people without requiring them to use vacation days or anything like that to join in the testimony.
And if I could speak to the age 25, I was able to join the U.S. military at 17 with the help of a sign from my mom and the recruiter. And I was able to begin HRT at age 19 with the help of my mom and a doctor. So I think for me, it's pretty obvious that we're allowing young people to make choices such as to join the military with the help of their parent. And I think that should remain the criteria, that it should be between the person making the choices to do HRT or surgery or anything like that with the help of their parent and a qualified professional.
One of the allegations made by Jamie Reid was that BJC doesn't follow up on those who transition and so doesn't know when people are having problems or second thoughts. What's your experience been?
I didn't go to that clinic.
You were not through BJC? Okay.
No, but I know that I get blood work done every 3 months, and I have for the last 5 years since I started, and that will maintain until I maybe decide to stop or maybe, get old enough that I don't need testosterone anymore. But I have had the best experience with going through my hormone replacement therapy and my hysterectomy that I've received. And I've been doing it for the last 5 years, and I have seen no adverse side effects. But it is, something that's not super, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of long-term studies because, a lot of this stuff it's new, and we're still learning, and I think it's really awesome about how amazing these professionals are and these doctors, and they're doing their job. They want these people to be healthy and happy, and in my experience, that's exactly what they're making sure that I am.
And do they follow up on your mental state, too?
Oh, for sure, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Are you sharing your experiences with young people?
Yeah, as much as I can. I have a little sister who's in high school, and so there's a lot of her friends who, it's kind of weird that kind of being that kind of role model. When I transitioned, I didn't really know any other transgender people, so it's really cool to be able to be that person for them that I wish that I had.
How is it socially when people meet Elliot Laurence and then they find out your story? Does it change their views?
I mean, it depends on the person. Typically, because I've been in transition for nearly 5 years, a lot of the people that I meet, they know me as me. But I also, when I transitioned to the military, I had a lot of people who knew me before my transition because I transitioned right in the middle of my 6-year contract. So sometimes, it was strange for people to kind of realize of people's bias or prejudices after they've met me and after they got to know me as a person. But luckily, I haven't had that experience very often. Most of the time, when I do let people know that I'm transgender, they may have never met a transgender person. And so it kind of, I think, opens their mind.
And you work at St. Louis University at that time. Mm-hmm. Have you considered moving to Illinois? I mean, you could still, like, you're close to down south.
I've not yet considered moving to Illinois, but we'll see how things go, right? So.
Rory, how many times have you been to Jeff City testifying?
I've lost count. I mean, if you say this year, I think we did a marathon testimony. They had 9 bills one night. They went until 1 a.m. at the very beginning, and that's how we started off session this year. But I've been going for lobby days. I've been going. We've been doing this for 4 years now, ever since. I think as soon as my son transitioned the next year, we started going to Jeff City to fight against these bills. And my son has been with me every step of the way and has become a really fierce advocate for himself.
And this has been going on for 4 years. Now, I did not realize that bills had been filed that far back. But
it's been going longer than 4 years.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, it predates the forms that we're seeing now of the healthcare and the sports bills. Those have been going for about 4 years here in Missouri.
Okay.
But that's just a new iteration of what we had seen before with the bathroom bills, saying that people can only use restrooms of the gender assigned at birth. All of those are couched in these seemingly innocuous ways to actually tell people that trans people are somehow wrong.
Same players in Jefferson City for the most part?
Well, you know, some of the seats change over and things like that. But again, a lot of it is really larger interest groups that are giving people these bills.
Maharat Rori Neiss, thank you very much for joining us on Next Up. And Elliot Laurence, thank you very much for joining us as well and sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you again next week.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9 PBS.